Hey guys, tonight we're trading your damp little apartment for something far more glamorous and far more doomed. The life of the fabulously rich in the Russian Empire during the 1910s. Think endless champagne, palaces the size of small towns, and enough diamonds to blind a passing horse. Also think revolution, frostbite, and a large crowd gathering outside your gilded front door who have recently finished reading a very persuasive pamphlet. But before we get comfortable, a huge and sincere thank you to whoever dropped this topic into the comments. You lot have impeccable taste in other people's misery, and this channel genuinely does not exist without your suggestions, so please keep them coming. And if you enjoy these little journeys into history's most uncomfortable moments, feel free to like and subscribe, but only if you actually want to. No pressure at all. If you would rather listen with your eyes gently closed, we're on Spotify now as well, and the link is sitting patiently in the description. Now, dim the lights, switch on a fan for that soft background hum, and tuck yourself in somewhere warm, because Russian winters do not care about your feelings and never have. Let us wonder together for a moment. Have you ever thought about what it actually felt like to be rich in Imperial Russia? Did the aristocrats know they were sitting on top of a volcano? Or were they too busy arguing about who sits next to whom at dinner? Could you survive owning 40 servants when you cannot even fold a fitted sheet? Would you last one single winter in a palace with 300 rooms and no central heating in any of them? What happens when your entire fortune is built on land, and the people who farm that land quietly decide they have had quite enough of you? And could you, a modern person with a phone and a skincare routine, glide through a royal ball without accidentally insulting a Grand Duke and getting yourself politely exiled to somewhere with mosquitoes? Well, you're about to find out. Congratulations. You've just woken up in 1913, buried under a mountain of imported linen, in a bedroom larger than most modern homes, in an empire that has roughly 4 years left to live. You simply do not know that yet. Sleep well. You do not wake to an alarm. You wake to the faint, well-mannered rustle of a servant who has been standing in the corner of your enormous bedroom for an unknown length of time, waiting for you to stir like a very patient ghost in an apron. There is a fire already lit, because someone rose at 4 a.m. to light it while you dreamed about nothing in particular. The room is so vast that the far wall is basically weather. You stretch beneath sheets that were pressed by human hands, and you have not yet done a single thing for yourself. And here is the unsettling part. You will not do a single thing for yourself all day. Welcome to the strange, gilded helplessness of the Russian aristocracy, where you own everything and can operate almost none of it. Let us take stock of your surroundings. The bed is a monument, carved and canopied and stuffed with down, an island of warmth in a room that is otherwise doing an excellent impression of the outdoors. Because here is the first great secret nobody puts on the postcards. Your palace is freezing. These buildings were designed to impress, not to insulate, and heating 300 rooms in a Russian winter is a war that no amount of money can fully win. The great tiled stoves in the corners glow valiantly, but their warmth reaches only so far, and the space between the stove and the far window is a slow, creeping cold that gets into your bones by lunch. You sleep in luxury and you wake up able to see your own breath. It is character building, apparently. Your servant approaches now, silent as a rumour, and the day's rituals begin. The curtains are drawn back to reveal a sky the colour of dishwater. A basin of warm water is presented so that you may be washed, because heaven forbid you locate your own face unassisted. There is no leaping out of bed, no groggy stumble to a kettle, no scrolling through bad news in the dark. There is only the slow, choreographed unfolding of a morning that other people have prepared for you down to the last degree of the water's temperature. Somewhere below, in a kitchen you have never once visited, Your breakfast is already being coaxed into existence by people you would not recognize if you passed them on the stairs. And this is the peculiar thing about your mornings. You are technically the most powerful person in this building. You are also functionally an infant. You cannot dress yourself efficiently. You cannot feed yourself without a small committee. And if every servant vanished tonight, you would likely struggle to make it to noon. It is a kind of learned helplessness dressed up as privilege, a life so thoroughly cushioned that you have never once had to develop a callus, literal or otherwise. Your hands are soft, your problems are imaginary. Your greatest crisis so far this morning is deciding which version of doing nothing you will pursue first. You sit up, and the day settles onto your shoulders like an expensive coat you did not ask for. There will be dressing, and eating, and visiting, and being visited, and a great deal of elaborate leisure that will somehow leave you exhausted. But before any of that, before you can even stand, there is the small matter of the entire silent army waiting just beyond your door, an army you command and barely understand. So let us go and meet them properly, because in your world you're never truly alone, and you never, ever will be. Let us count the people who exist purely to keep you alive and slightly bored. There is the valet, the footmen, the cook and the undercooks, the coachman, the stable hands, the nursemaids, the housekeeper, the maids who serve the maids, and at least one person whose entire job is your gloves. A great household might run to dozens or even hundreds of staff, an entire working village humming quietly beneath your feet, so that your feet never have to know about it. It is like having the world's largest group chat, except none of them are allowed to text back. And here is the quiet, uncomfortable truth stitched into all of it. Every one of those people is watching you far more closely than you are watching them, and one day soon that is going to matter enormously. Consider the sheer architecture of it. Your household is not staffed, it is populated. There are people whose specialties are so narrow they would baffle a modern person. One servant lays the fires, another polishes the silver and touches nothing else. A footman is chosen partly for his height, because tall footmen look impressive standing behind chairs, which is genuinely most of the job. There are maids who exist to dress the ladies and maids who exist to dress the maids who dress the ladies, a chain of service so long it loops back on itself. You could spend a decade in this house and never learn all their names, which is convenient, because you have no intention of trying. They live differently from you, obviously. While you occupy the grand rooms with their painted ceilings, the staff move through a hidden second building folded inside the first, a maze of narrow back stairs, cramped attic quarters, and cold basement kitchens. They rise before you and sleep after you. They eat what is left. They see everything: your tempers, your affairs, your debts, your habits, the precise state of your marriage. To you, they are furniture that occasionally fetches things. To them you are a full-time subject of study, and they know you the way a zookeeper knows a temperamental animal. Now you tell yourself the arrangement is warm and mutual. You imagine your servants are devoted, that old Nanny loves you like her own, that the footmen are proud to serve so fine a family. And some of that is even true. Genuine loyalty and real affection do exist in these houses, alongside decades of shared history. But you have made the classic error of the comfortable, which is to mistake the absence of complaint for the presence of contentment. Nobody's going to tell you to your face that they resent scrubbing your chamber pot for wages that barely feed their children. That is not how any of this works, because underneath the deference, a slow arithmetic is being done. Every servant can see the gap between the world upstairs and the world down below, and every year that gap looks less like the natural order of things and more like a choice that someone made and someone else is paying for. The new ideas we will get to are spreading fastest exactly here, in the back stairs and the servants' halls, whispered over the washing up. The people closest to you, the ones who know your weaknesses best, are precisely the ones the future is trying hardest to recruit. But you're not worrying about any of that this morning. You have far more pressing concerns, because before you can face the day, you must first survive the elaborate ordeal of getting dressed, and that is going to take a while. Time to get dressed, which is less a task and more a small ceremony requiring a support team. If you are a lady, you are about to be laced into a corset by someone pulling with the grim determination of a sailor hauling anchor, then layered into silk, wool, furs, and a hat large enough to have its own postal code. If you are a gentleman, you are being poured into a uniform or a stiff frock coat with a collar, designed to slowly strangle your good mood. None of this is comfortable. None of it is warm enough. All of it is expensive enough to feed a peasant family for a year, and you will change outfits like this several more times before nightfall, because in your world, wearing the same clothes from morning to evening is the sort of thing that gets whispered about at parties. Let us begin with the corset, that great engineering marvel of controlled suffering. It goes on over the underthings, and then it is cinched, and then it is cinched again, until your ribs are having a serious conversation with your spine, and your breathing has become more of a suggestion than a reliable process. The fashionable silhouette demands it, and fashion, in your world, is not optional. You will spend the entire day standing very straight because you have no other choice, and you will eat carefully because your stomach has been relocated. Fainting is common enough that it is almost a social convention. Nothing says elegance quite like periodically losing consciousness in a warm room. Then come the layers, and there are so many layers. Chemise, corset, petticoats, the dress itself, and over all of it the furs, because it is winter roughly 11 months of the year, and your beautiful palace is, as established, an icebox with good taste. The fabrics are extraordinary. Imported silks and velvets and lace, embroidered by hands that ruin their eyesight to make you sparkle. A single gown can cost more than a working family sees in years, and you own so many that you genuinely cannot remember them all. You will wear this one until midday, then change for visiting, then change again for dinner, then possibly a fourth time if there is an evening engagement. Your clothing has a busier schedule than most modern people. If you are a gentleman, your ordeal is different but no gentler. You are laced and buttoned into a uniform if you have military rank, which most men of your class technically do, whether or not they have ever come within a mile of actual danger. The collar is high and stiff and rigid, holding your chin at the permanent angle of a man smelling something disagreeable. Everything must be immaculate. A spot, a wrinkle, a badly tied cravat. These are small catastrophes, because your appearance is a public statement about your family standing, and in this society your family standing is quite literally the only thing you have. And here is the joke buried in all of it. For all this expense, all this effort, all these people and hours and rubles poured into wrapping you in the finest cloth on earth, you are still cold. The furs help, the layers help, but the deep chill of a Russian palace laughs at all of it. You are the best-dressed shivering person in Europe. You have spent a fortune to be uncomfortable in style. Fully assembled at last, buttoned and laced and faintly wheezing, you're ready to descend and begin the serious business of the day. And the serious business of the day, as always, begins with the most important meal you will not have earned: breakfast. Breakfast arrives on silver, carried by people who bow, in a room where the ceiling is a painting and the table could seat a regiment. There is coffee, there is chocolate, there are pastries flown in ideas from Paris, there is caviar, because of course there is caviar, and there is more food than your household could possibly eat, which is precisely the point. Waste here is not an accident. Waste is a statement. Meanwhile, if you glanced honestly out of the frosted window, You would see people for whom this single breakfast is an unimaginable fortune, but you will not glance out of the window because someone has already drawn the curtains and refilled your cup. It is remarkably easy to ignore a country when it is standing on the other side of good drapery. The scale of the food is difficult to convey to a modern person raised on the idea that a meal should roughly match a hunger. This is not that. This is abundance as theatre. There are eggs prepared 4 ways, cold meats and smoked fish, fresh bread and sweet rolls, preserves, honey, cheeses, fruit that had to travel a very long way to reach a frozen country in winter and is therefore worth a small fortune per grape. There is tea from the great humming samovar, always hot, always ready, the one genuinely Russian thing on a table otherwise pretending to be French. And there is enough of everything that most of it will be carried away untouched, to be eaten by the staff or simply thrown out. You eat lightly, of course, partly because of the corset situation from the previous chapter, and partly because eating heartily is faintly vulgar. The point was never for you to consume it all. The point was for it to be there, glittering and excessive, proof rendered in butter and caviar that your household can command such things every single morning without a second thought. A guest arriving unexpectedly must find a table that looks like a festival. Anything less would be an embarrassment your family would not survive socially, which in your world is the only kind of not surviving you currently worry about. Now where does all this come from? The fish and the game from your estates, the exotic fruits and the fine coffee shipped across a continent at enormous cost, the French pastries from a chef you pay a salary that would stagger a bishop. Your breakfast is a small logistical empire, a supply chain stretching across Europe and deep into your own vast lands, all of it converging on this one table so that you may pick at a roll and leave the rest. The effort is invisible to you. It simply appears the way water appears when you turn a tap, and you have thought about the source about as often. And this is the quiet moral hazard of your entire existence, laid out in edible form every morning. You have been raised to believe that this abundance is natural, ordained, permanent, the simple background condition of being who you are. It has never once occurred to you that it depends on millions of people continuing to grow the grain, catch the fish, and haul the crates, and continuing to accept that the fruits of all that labour should pile up here, on your table, to be admired and discarded. It is a beautiful arrangement, as long as absolutely nobody down the chain ever stops to do the arithmetic. You dab your lips and rise. The day proper can begin now, and it will begin, as your whole life does, in a language that is not the language of the country you're standing in. Here is something delightfully absurd about your class. You may barely speak the language of the country you own. For generations, the Russian aristocracy conducted its life in French, the language of elegance, gossip, love letters, and looking down on people. Your Russian, if you have any, is the clumsy servant's tongue you use to give orders to the staff. You dream in French, insult people in French, and read French novels about French people having French problems. It is a bit like living in a house you refuse to learn the address of, and it plants a seed you cannot yet see. When the storm finally comes, the people it comes for will be a tiny, glittering caste who could not even talk to the nation in its own words. Understand how deep this runs. From the cradle you were raised by a French governess and later an English tutor, and French was the language of the drawing room, the dinner table, the intimate note passed between lovers. Russian was for the kitchen and the stable. A truly fashionable family might speak French so exclusively that the children grew up fluent in the tongue of Paris and awkward in the tongue of their own country. To pepper your conversation with French phrases is to signal breeding. To speak Russian too well, too naturally, is faintly embarrassing, the mark of someone who has spent rather too much time among the servants. The reasons stretch back a couple of centuries to when your ancestors decided that true civilization lived in the West, and that Russia, vast and cold and complicated, was something to be improved by importing French manners, French clothes, French architecture and French thoughts. So your class built itself a little transplanted Europe and lived inside it, gazing longingly toward Paris while standing in the middle of Russia. You summer on the French Riviera, you buy your gowns from French houses, you quote French philosophers you have half read. You are, culturally speaking, a tourist who never went home, and this creates a gap that is genuinely strange to contemplate. There are two Russias occupying the same space. There is your Russia, French-speaking, Western-facing, cosmopolitan, comfortable, floating a few feet above the ground. And there is the other Russia, the enormous one, the one that speaks actual Russian, prays in Russian, sings in Russian, suffers in Russian, and has never in its life had a single conversation with anyone from your world that was not a command. You share a country and almost nothing else. You are neighbours who cannot understand each other, separated by a language barrier of your own construction. For now, this feels like sophistication. It feels like being part of a refined international elite rather than being stuck in a backward country. It is, you tell yourself, simply what cultured people do. But languages are not just words. They are belonging. To speak French while your nation speaks Russian is to announce, every time you open your mouth, that you consider yourself a different and finer species than the people all around you. And people notice that sort of thing. They notice it for a very long time, quietly, and they file it away. So when the reckoning finally arrives, and it is coming, one of the many charges laid against your class will be exactly this: that you were foreigners in your own land, that you took everything the country produced and could not even be bothered to learn its language. It will be hard to argue with. You will not have the words, or rather, you will have them just in the wrong tongue. Which raises the question you have spent your whole life not asking. Everything you have, this palace, this breakfast, these imported clothes and imported ideas, all of it has to be paid for somehow. So let us finally follow the money. Nobody at your table likes to discuss where the money comes from, which is usually a sign that the answer is uncomfortable. The answer is land. Enormous, ancestral, seemingly endless tracts of land, worked for generations by peasants whose grandparents were legally owned until 1861, when serfdom was finally abolished and everyone politely agreed to keep the arrangement almost exactly the same in spirit. Your wealth grows out of the soil and out of the backs of people you will never learn the names of. You did not earn it. You inherited it, the way one inherits a family curse or an unfortunate nose, and the entire towering structure of your comfortable life rests on one increasingly shaky assumption, that those people down in the fields will keep quietly agreeing to the whole thing forever. Let us talk about serfdom, because it is the ghost at every one of your feasts. Until 1861, a very large portion of the Russian population was not free. Serfs were bound to the land and, in practice, to the noble who owned it. They could be bought, sold, gambled away, and moved about like livestock with slightly better paperwork. Your grandparents lived in a world where human beings were counted among the assets of an estate, listed in the ledger somewhere between the cattle and the timber. That is the foundation your family fortune was poured on, and it was poured quite recently. Your grandfather remembers it. Then came emancipation, the great reform, the moment the serfs were legally freed. It sounds like a clean break, a bright line between a dark past and a fairer future. It was not. The freed peasants were granted land, yes, but they were made to pay for it, saddled with redemption payments that stretched across decades and kept them shackled by debt instead of by law. The nobility, meanwhile, kept the best land and a great deal of the money. So the peasant walked out of legal bondage straight into economic bondage, which from the peasant's mud-caked perspective looked suspiciously like the same field, the same landlord, and the same empty stomach. Freedom, it turned out, had an installment plan, and your class simply carried on. The estate still produced grain and timber and rents. The money still flowed upward into your drawing rooms and out again toward Paris. You did not need to work the land or manage it well, or even visit it particularly often. You needed only to own it and to collect. Many noble families were, in truth, spectacularly bad at the actual business of their estates, running up enormous debts while living far beyond their means, mortgaging the future to keep the balls glittering in the present. Being rich, for your class, was less a skill than an inheritance you were slowly and elegantly squandering. Here is the part that should keep you awake if you were the sort of person who thought about such things, which you are not. Your entire way of life depends on a single continued agreement, and it is an agreement you never actually negotiated. It is the agreement of the millions of people below you to keep producing the wealth and keep handing it up, decade after decade, in exchange for very little. As long as they believe there is no alternative, the arrangement holds. The moment they stop believing that, the moment someone convincing tells them the land could simply be theirs, the whole beautiful structure has nothing left holding it up but habit. And habits, as it happens, can break astonishingly fast. So before we return to your gilded distractions, we should take one honest look at the people that habit depends on, the vast silent majority you have spent your whole life not seeing. They are the largest fact in your country and the smallest thought in your mind. The peasants are the vast, patient, hungry majority of the Russian Empire, and to your class they are less like people and more like weather, a background condition that occasionally becomes inconvenient. You picture them, if you picture them at all, as simple and loyal and content, humming folk songs while they toil, grateful for your existence. This is a comforting fantasy, and almost entirely wrong. Down there, in the villages, resentment is being distilled slowly over decades like something strong and homemade. You cannot smell it yet from inside your warm rooms, but it is fermenting, and one day the fumes are going to reach even you. Let us actually look at their lives, since you never have. The Russian peasant lives in a small wooden village, in a cramped hut heated by a great stove that the whole family sleeps on and around in winter, to survive the cold that would kill them otherwise. The work is relentless and dictated by seasons that do not care whether you are tired. There is farming from first light, there is the constant threat of a bad harvest, and there is the ever-present arithmetic of hunger, because famine is not a historical horror in this country, but a recurring guest who visits often enough to be expected. When the crops fail, people starve, whole regions of them, while the grain that might have saved them is exported to pay for luxuries you may notice rather like yours. Their world is small and their burdens are enormous. There are taxes and there are those lingering debts from emancipation. There is military conscription which can swallow the strongest young men for years. There is a landlord, quite possibly you, whose comfort is built directly on top of their labour, and who they see, if at all, as a distant figure who occasionally rolls through in a fine carriage on the way to somewhere better. To them you are not a person either. You are the weather too, a force that takes and gives back nothing they can eat. And yet you have constructed an entire mythology to make yourself feel comfortable about this. You tell yourself the peasant is a childlike creature, devout and humble, mystically attached to the soil and to the Tsar, who they supposedly love as a little father. There is a grain of truth to the devotion, and a mountain of self-serving fantasy piled on top of it. It is a great deal easier to enjoy your caviar if you believe the people who caught the fish are simple, happy souls who want nothing more than to serve. Believing they might be intelligent, furious, and capable of doing arithmetic would ruin the whole meal. Because they are doing arithmetic. Word travels, even to the villages. News of the wider world, of other countries, of dangerous new ideas, seeps in through returning soldiers, through the few who can read, through agitators who make it their business to explain to a starving man exactly why he is starving. The peasant is beginning to understand that his poverty is not the natural order of the universe. It is a system, and systems, unlike weather, can be changed by the people trapped inside them, especially when those people vastly, overwhelmingly outnumber the people at the top. But you do not hear any of this. From where you sit, the country is calm, the fields are full, the villages are quiet, and the folk songs, if you ever heard one, would sound perfectly content. So you turn away from the frozen window, back toward the warmth and the light, because there is, as always, a party to prepare for. And in your world, the party is practically a full-time occupation. Your calendar is not organised around work because you do not have any, so it is organised around the social season. A marathon of balls, dinners, receptions and evenings at the opera, where the actual opera is beside the point. The point is to be seen, to be seated correctly, to wear the right thing, and to gently destroy your rivals with a raised eyebrow. Missing an important invitation is a catastrophe. Being seated below someone you consider beneath you is a scandal worth losing sleep over. It is astonishing how much emotional energy your class pours into problems that do not exist, while carefully avoiding the one enormous problem that very much does. But we will get to that. For now, put on your good shoes. The season has a rhythm, and everyone who matters follows it like a migrating flock. In the coldest, darkest months, the great families gather in the capital, and the city becomes a whirl of illuminated windows and carriages hissing through the snow. There are balls nearly every night at one grand house or another. There are formal dinners that last for hours and involve enough courses to require pacing yourself like an athlete. There is the theatre and the ballet and the opera, where you occupy your family's box and spend most of the performance observing which other boxes are occupied by whom, and in what company, and wearing what. The stage is merely the excuse. The audience is the show. And it is exhausting, which is the part outsiders never believe. Doing nothing productive is somehow a full-time job with punishing hours. You must attend the right events and skip the wrong ones. You must remember the labyrinth of who is currently feuding with whom, whose star is rising, whose family has quietly gone broke and is pretending otherwise, which marriage is being arranged and which is quietly falling apart. You must make conversation that is witty, but never too clever, charming but never too warm, because sincerity is a bit gauche, and genuine emotion is best kept for the servants. It is like a video game with 1,000 invisible rules where the only prize is being allowed to keep playing. The stakes feel enormous because within your tiny world they are. Your family's position is a delicate thing, maintained through appearances and alliances, and a single misstep can send it tumbling. Snub the wrong person and doors begin to close. Be snubbed yourself and everyone notices, and the whispering starts, and whispering in this world can end a family as surely as bankruptcy. So you pour your entire cunning, your whole intelligence, all your considerable energy into navigating a set of social hazards that are, viewed from any sane distance, completely made up. That is the great comedy of the social season. It is a magnificent, glittering, ruthless competition over absolutely nothing of substance. Not one thing accomplished at these events will feed a single person, build a single road, or strengthen the country by an inch. It is pure status, status all the way down, an entire ruling class devoting its finest efforts to the question of who curtsies to whom. And while all this brilliant energy is being spent on seating charts and eyebrows, the actual country, the enormous real one outside the ballroom, is drifting steadily toward a cliff that nobody in the room is looking at. but you cannot see the cliff from the ballroom. You can only see the chandeliers, and tonight they are lit because tonight there is a ball, and a ball, as you're about to be reminded, is not a party. A ball is an examination, and failing it is fatal. Tonight there is a ball, and a ball is a minefield disguised as a party. There are thousands of unwritten rules, and everyone knows them except you, and breaking one is social death. You must bow to precisely the correct depth, to precisely the correct person. You must know who outranks whom in a hierarchy so intricate it makes a modern office seem relaxed. You must dance the mazurka without maiming your partner, make conversation without saying anything true, and never, ever laugh at the wrong moment. The chandeliers hold hundreds of candles. The jewels could ransom a city. And somewhere in that shimmering crowd, someone is deciding your entire future based on how you hold your fork. No pressure. Let us walk in together. The ballroom is a vision, and it is meant to be. Hundreds of candles blaze in the chandeliers and multiply in the tall mirrors, so that the whole room seems made of light. The floor is polished to a lethal shine. The orchestra is tuning. The air is thick with perfume, hot wax, and the particular tension of several hundred people, all simultaneously performing effortlessness. Everyone is beautiful, everyone is armoured in silk and diamonds, and everyone is watching everyone else with the sharp, smiling attention of people who have turned surveillance into a leisure activity. Now, the dancing. This is not a modern gathering where you may sway vaguely and call it enough. The dances are formal, structured, and memorized, elaborate sequences of steps and turns and changes of partner that everyone in the room learned as a child under the eye of a stern dancing master. To stumble is to be marked. To forget the figure is to be humiliated in front of the exact people whose opinion determines your worth. The mazurka in particular is a spirited, complicated thing, and a gentleman who performs it well is admired, while one who performs it badly might as well announce his family's decline through a megaphone. Your feet are not merely dancing, they are testifying to your fitness for this world. And then there is the conversation, which is its own dance, and arguably the more dangerous one. You must be light. You must be amusing. You must flirt within precise and invisible limits, compliment without grovelling, gossip without ever being caught doing it, and steer clear of anything real. Politics, money, sincere feeling, the state of the country, these are not fit topics, and a person who raises them earnestly at a ball is regarded roughly the way a modern person would regard someone who began weeping at a wedding. The whole point is the surface. The whole art is staying beautifully, brilliantly on it. The hierarchy governs everything. There is an order of precedence so detailed it might as well be law, dictating who is greeted first, who is seated where, who may approach whom and how. A grand duke is not a countess, is not a mere gentleman, and treating them as equals, or worse, getting the order wrong, is the kind of error that follows you. You're constantly calculating rank, adjusting your bow, measuring your warmth, performing an exhausting real-time mathematics of deference while also dancing, also conversing, also not sweating through your very expensive clothes. Survive the evening, and you've gained nothing but the right to do it again next week. Fail it, though, truly fail it, and the consequences ripple outward for years. This is the strange truth of the ball. It is the most beautiful room you will ever stand in, and it is also a trap, a shining, candlelit trap where your family's fate is gambled nightly on the placement of your feet and the timing of your smile. And if you think this is intimidating, brace yourself, because there is a version of all this that is grander, stricter, and infinitely more perilous. There is the court. If you are truly grand, you may be presented at the imperial court, which is the aristocratic version of the final boss. This means an audience within reach of the Tsar and Tsarina themselves, in rooms so gilded they seem to be on fire, surrounded by courtiers who have spent their whole lives perfecting the art of standing still and judging you. The rules of court etiquette are so elaborate that people study them the way surgeons study anatomy. One misplaced word, one wrong gesture, and you can spend years clawing your way back into favour. Proximity to the throne is the ultimate prize in your world. It is also, though nobody says it aloud, about to become the single most dangerous address in the entire empire. The setting alone is designed to overwhellow you, and it succeeds. The imperial palaces make your own grand home look like a modest cottage. There are halls of malachite and gold, floors of inlaid wood you feel guilty walking on, and so much gilding that on a sunny day the light off the walls is almost painful. Everything is scaled to make a human being feel small, and the throne feel eternal. You process through these rooms in your finest court dress, which follows its own rigid regulations down to the fabric and the length of the train, and you're acutely aware that everyone present has assessed your outfit, your posture, and your family within about 4 seconds of your arrival. The etiquette is a science and a minefield. There are precise rules for how deeply to bow or curtsy, how to approach, when to speak, and when to hold your tongue, how to withdraw from the imperial presence without committing the catastrophe of turning your back. Ladies presented at court must master a curtsy so deep and so controlled it borders on a gymnastic feat, all while wearing a heavy gown and being watched by the most critical audience in the empire. You have rehearsed for weeks. You're still terrified, and correctly so, because a fumble here is not forgotten. The court has a very long memory and very little mercy. And at the centre of it all sit the Tsar and Tsarina, the living summit of your entire universe. To be noticed favourably by them is the highest achievement your world can offer, a validation that echoes through your family for generations. To be received coldly is a wound. Careers, marriages, fortunes and futures all bend around the question of imperial favour, and so the court is thick with ambition, flattery, rivalry and fear, all of it hidden behind flawless manners and frozen smiles. It is the most refined room in the world and one of the most vicious. You want this. Of course you want this. Everything in your upbringing has pointed you toward that throne like a compass needle toward the north. Proximity to the crown is the whole game, the summit you have been climbing your entire life without ever quite asking why. To stand near the Tsar is to stand in the warm light of legitimacy itself, the source from which all your world's meaning flows. There is no higher place to be, which is exactly why you should be afraid, though you're not, because nobody in these dazzling rooms is thinking about the future in the way the future is thinking about them. The closer you stand to that throne, the higher you have climbed, and the higher you climb, the further there is to fall. When this whole gilded structure comes down, and the beams are already groaning if you knew how to listen, it will not fall gently, and it will not fall on the people at the bottom first. It will fall on the people at the very top, the ones standing closest to the crown, the ones who wanted this proximity most desperately of all. But that reckoning is still a few years off. For now you curtsy, you rise and you bask. There is, after all, still so much more of this glittering life to explore. In your class, marriage is far too important to be left to anything as unreliable as love. It is a business arrangement dressed in lace, a fusion of 2 fortunes, 2 names, and 2 family strategies, negotiated by relatives who treat your heart like a line item. A good match can rescue a struggling estate. A bad one can sink a dynasty. You may meet your future spouse a handful of times before the wedding. chaperoned so thoroughly that a private conversation is nearly impossible. Affection, if it arrives at all, is expected to turn up sometime after the ceremony, like a delayed delivery. It is a strange way to build a life, and it means your household is often two near strangers sharing a very large, very cold house. Consider how the whole thing is assembled. Somewhere, older relatives are studying the field of eligible families the way generals study a map, weighing bloodlines, titles, and, most importantly, money. Does that family have land to match yours? Do their debts cancel out your debts, or double them? Is the name old enough, grand enough, connected enough to the right people at court? You, the actual human being at the centre of this, are consulted roughly as often as the furniture is consulted about where to sit. Your preferences are a pleasant bonus if they happen to align with the strategy, and a minor obstacle to be managed if they do not. The courtship, such as it is, unfolds under constant supervision. A young woman of your class is guarded like a vault. She's rarely, if ever, alone with a man, and every meeting with a potential husband happens under the watchful eye of a mother, an aunt, or a chaperone whose entire purpose is to ensure that nothing interesting occurs. You might exchange a few careful words at a ball, a few more at a dinner, and on the strength of these brief, heavily policed encounters, you are expected to agree to spend the rest of your life with a person you know about, as well as you know your dentist. And yet the stakes could not be higher, because in this world marriage is essentially permanent and essentially total. Divorce is a scandal so enormous most families would rather endure decades of quiet misery than face it. So the match you make is the match you keep, for better, or quite frequently, for considerably worse. If you are lucky, respect grows, and companionship, and sometimes even genuine love blossoms out of the arranged soil. If you are unlucky, you spend your life politely orbiting a stranger, each of you conducting your real emotional existence elsewhere, discreetly, while maintaining a flawless public performance of unity. Because that performance is the entire point. A great marriage is not measured by the happiness of the two people inside it. It is measured by what it produces: heirs to continue the line, alliances to strengthen the family, and the seamless appearance of a dynasty functioning exactly as a dynasty should. Love is a private matter, and frankly a slightly embarrassing one. Duty is the public virtue, and duty is what you were bred for. So you enter your marriage as you enter everything else in this life, dressed magnificently, watched closely, and following a script written by other people long before you were born. It may bring you contentment. It may bring you loneliness in a beautiful gown. Either way, it will bring you children, eventually, and that raises the next great question of your gilded existence, which is what on earth happens to those children, given that you will barely be permitted to raise them yourself. Being a rich woman in Imperial Russia is a peculiar kind of imprisonment, one furnished with silk and diamonds so you barely notice the bars. Your value is measured in your family name, your dowry, and your ability to produce heirs and preside gracefully over a household. Real power is technically forbidden to you, so you learn to wield it sideways, through influence, through connection, through the quiet architecture of who gets invited where. You're educated just enough to be charming and not enough to be dangerous, and yet tucked into this restricted life, many women grow sharp, watchful and formidable, running enormous estates and complex families with an iron competence that the men around them rarely bother to notice. The gilding is real, so are the bars. Let us be clear about the confinement first, because it is genuine. Your life is bounded on every side by rules you did not write. You cannot vote, cannot hold most positions of formal authority, and cannot move through the world with anything like the freedom your brothers enjoy. Your reputation is a fragile, precious thing that can be shattered by a rumour, so your movements are watched, your acquaintances managed, your behaviour constantly measured against an impossible standard of grace. A man of your class can gamble, drink, and stray, and society will mostly shrug. A woman who does a fraction of the same is finished. The rules are not equal, and everybody knows they are not equal, and everybody pretends this is simply the natural order. But here is where it gets interesting, because a clever woman in a cage does not simply sit there. She learns the bars intimately, and then she learns to work between them. Denied formal power, the women of your class became masters of the informal kind. You cannot command, so you influence. You cannot rule an estate on paper, so you run it in practice while your husband is off drinking, duelling, or losing money at cards. You cannot sit in the halls of government, but you can host the salon where the men who do sit there come to talk, and you can shape those conversations with a skill they never even notice they're being managed by. The great households, in truth, often run on female competence. Behind the grand facade of male authority, it is frequently the lady of the house who keeps the whole enterprise from collapsing, managing the vast staff, the finances, the social calendar, the education of the children, and the delicate web of family relationships, all while maintaining the serene appearance of a woman who does nothing but look decorative. It is an enormous quantity of invisible labour performed by people who are given no official credit for any of it, which is a story so old it predates the Russian Empire by several thousand years. And so you become something the men around you rarely bother to see clearly: shrewd, resilient, and quietly formidable. An operator of considerable power who has been trained her whole life to hide exactly how much power she has. Some women find real satisfaction in this. Others find only a beautifully upholstered frustration. Most find some exhausting mixture of both. But whatever strength you develop, it exists inside limits you cannot escape. And one of the sharpest of those limits is that even your own children are not entirely yours to raise. They belong, in a sense, to the family, to the dynasty, to the institution, and they will be handed off to a small professional army of caretakers almost from birth. So let us go up to the nursery wing and meet the strangers who are raising the next generation of your name. Your children are precious, adored, and largely raised by other people. There are nursemaids for the early years, then governesses and tutors, often imported from France, England, or Germany, so that your offspring grow up speaking 3 languages and knowing almost nothing about the country they will inherit. You see the children at appointed times, scrubbed and presentable, and then they're whisked away again to the nursery wing, which may as well be another country. It is affection conducted at a formal distance, love delivered by appointment. Your child may be closer to their English nanny than to you, and in a bitter twist you cannot foresee, some of those clever foreign tutors are quietly filling young heads with the very ideas that will one day burn your world down. Picture the layout of it. The children do not live with you, not really. They live in the nursery wing, a self-contained little kingdom at the far end of the house, staffed by nannies and nursemaids who feed them, bathe them, comfort them at night, and are present for the 10,000 small moments that actually make up a childhood. You're present for the highlights, the arranged visits, the moments when a clean and well-behaved child is brought down to be admired for a while, and then removed before anything as tiresome as a tantrum can occur. You love them enormously, and you know them rather less well than the servants do. The early bond then forms not with you, but with the nanny, that warm and constant figure who is actually there. Many a grand aristocrat remembered their childhood nurse with more genuine tenderness than they remembered their own mother, because the nurse was the one who was present. It is a strange arrangement, outsourcing the deepest years of your child's emotional life to a hired stranger, but it is simply how things are done, and questioning it would be like questioning gravity. The staff raise the children. The parents supervise from a distance like fond investors checking on a promising asset. Then, as the children grow, The foreign experts arrive. A French governess to instill manners and the all-important French language. An English tutor, perhaps, because English things are fashionable and English education is admired. A German for music or discipline. Your children thus grow up trilingual, refined, and thoroughly cosmopolitan, more at home discussing European culture than the realities of the vast Russian country spread out beyond the estate gates. They are being manufactured into perfect little aristocrats, polished for a world that assumes it will last forever. And here is the exquisite irony you cannot possibly see coming. These educated foreigners you have invited into the heart of your home, these clever tutors and governesses shaping your children's minds, are also conduits for the wider world of ideas, and the wider world of ideas in this era is crackling with things that are extremely dangerous to families like yours. A tutor with liberal sympathies, a governess who lends an older child the wrong book, a student hired cheaply to teach mathematics who happens to have very firm opinions about the redistribution of property. You have opened your door to the modern mind, and the modern mind does not think much of hereditary privilege. So the next generation of your dynasty is being raised by strangers in 3 foreign languages, absorbing along with their grammar lessons the faint early tremors of the earthquake to come. They're being prepared beautifully for a life that is about to be cancelled. But that preparation is thorough, and it deserves a closer look, because the education of an aristocrat is a masterpiece of a very particular and ultimately fatal kind. Your education is a masterpiece of beautiful uselessness. You can quote poetry in 4 languages, discuss French philosophy, play the piano, ride elegantly, and identify a good vintage at 50 paces. What you cannot do is anything practical whatsoever. You have never cooked a meal, lit your own fire, handled your own money, or spent an afternoon doing something that would still matter if the servants vanished overnight. Your learning is ornamental, designed to make you a delightful guest and a graceful ornament, not a functioning adult. It is a bit like being trained your whole life for a job that consists entirely of attending parties, which, to be fair, is more or less the job, right up until the moment the parties stop. Let us admire the curriculum, because it truly is impressive in its way. You have been taught languages until they pour out of you, French above all, but also English, German, perhaps Italian. You know literature, the great works, the poetry, enough to drop a perfect quotation into conversation at the ideal moment. You have studied music and can perform respectably on the piano when called upon. You dance beautifully. You ride beautifully. You know art, history, the manners and customs of every court in Europe, and the precise gradations of rank that govern your entire social existence. You are, by the standards of your world, superbly accomplished. And every single one of those accomplishments is an ornament. Look closely, and you will notice that nothing you learned was ever meant to produce anything. You were not educated to build, to make, to solve, to earn, or to survive. You were educated to decorate a drawing room, to be an asset to your family's social standing, to marry well and converse charmingly and glide through the world like a lovely, expensive object that also happens to be able to discuss Voltaire. Usefulness, in the ordinary sense, was never the goal. Usefulness was for other people, the ones who grew the food and lit the fires and made the whole floating world possible. So there are gaps in your knowledge you are not even aware of because they have never once mattered. You do not know how to cook, having never entered a kitchen except to inspect it. You do not know how money actually works, only that it appears, spent by managers and stewards on your behalf. You could not light a stove, mend a garment, grow a vegetable, or complete any of the countless small survival tasks that the vast majority of humanity performs without a second thought. If dropped into an ordinary life tomorrow, you would be about as capable as a very well-read toddler. For now, this is not a problem. It is in fact the entire point. Your uselessness is a status symbol, proof that you are so far above the grubby necessities of life that you have never had to learn them. The truly grand person does not know how things work, because knowing how things work is beneath them. Helplessness is a luxury, and you wear it as proudly as your furs. But hold that thought, and hold it tight, because there is a version of the future rushing toward you in which the servants are gone, the money is gone, the estates are seized, and the single most valuable skill on earth is the ability to do something, anything, with your own two soft and beautifully idle hands. In that future, all your languages and poetry and perfect posture will be worth precisely nothing, and the peasant who can grow a potato will be richer than you in every way that suddenly matters. You just cannot imagine that future yet. So instead you go shopping, because if there is one thing your education did prepare you for, it is spending money with breathtaking style. Your class has elevated spending money into a form of religious devotion. There are jewels sewn into gowns, entire rooms decorated to be used once a year, and objects of such exquisite pointlessness that they take your breath away. The imperial family itself commissions Fabergé eggs, dazzling little masterpieces of gold and gems and clockwork, given as Easter presents, each one worth a fortune that could reshape an entire province. Owning beautiful things is not enough. The things must be needlessly, gloriously expensive, because the expense is the message. You're announcing in diamonds that you're so wealthy the money itself has stopped being real to you. Somewhere in a cold village the money is still extremely real. That gap between the two is exactly where revolutions come from. Let us start with the eggs, because they are the perfect symbol of the whole enterprise. Each Easter, the imperial family receives jeweled eggs from the great jeweler Fabergé, and these are not decorations so much as small miracles of obsessive craftsmanship. Gold, enamel, precious stones, and inside, a surprise. A tiny mechanical bird that sings, a miniature carriage that actually rolls, a portrait, a jewel within the jewel. Each one takes a year to make and costs a sum that could feed and house a large number of the empire's starving for that same year. They're exquisite. They're also, if you squint at them honestly, one of the most concentrated expressions of moral obliviousness ever crafted by human hands, and the eggs are only the pinnacle of a habit that runs through your entire class. Everything about your life is an exercise in conspicuous excess. There are the jewels, of course, ropes of pearls and rivers of diamonds worn casually to dinner. There are gowns embroidered by hand for months and worn perhaps twice. There are palaces with grand ballrooms open once a year and heated for a single evening. There are furs, carriages, imported delicacies, art collections assembled less out of love than out of the need to have art collections. You do not buy things because you need them. You buy them because buying them proves what you are. That is the crucial thing to understand. The expense is not a side effect. The expense is the entire purpose. A reasonably priced item, however lovely, communicates nothing. An absurdly, wastefully, almost insultingly expensive item communicates everything. That your family sits so high above ordinary concerns that money has become an abstraction, a thing you deploy for effect rather than count for survival. To spend wildly is to demonstrate that you can, and demonstrating that you can is the closest thing your class has to a purpose. But step back and look at the arithmetic. The arithmetic you have been so carefully trained never to look at. Every diamond, every egg, every single-use ballroom represents an enormous quantity of value, and all that value came from somewhere. It came up from the land and the labour, from the grain and the timber and the endless work of the millions below. It was gathered from an entire country and concentrated here, into objects whose only function is to glitter and to announce your superiority. the wealth of a province, resting in the palm of your hand in the form of a mechanical golden bird. Now imagine you are one of the people who produced that wealth, standing in the cold, hungry, and you see the golden bird or hear of it. Imagine you're told by someone persuasive exactly how many of your winters went into that one toy. This is the gap that swallows empires. This is the exact distance, measured in diamonds, between the top of your world and the bottom, and it is a distance that people are beginning to find unforgivable. But you cannot dwell on unpleasant thoughts. You are in fact feeling a little unwell, and when you feel unwell, your class has a very particular and very expensive solution. When you fall ill, you do not simply see a doctor. You embark on a health journey, ideally to somewhere warm and expensive with a French name. Your class treats sickness as an occasion for travel, decamping to spa towns and seaside resorts to take the waters, rest the nerves, and recover from the exhausting business of doing nothing. Nervous complaints are practically a hobby. Delicate constitutions are almost a status symbol. Meanwhile, actual medicine is a strange blend of genuine expertise, expensive guesswork, and whatever a fashionable specialist swears by this season. You will be bled, dosed, massaged, and sent to breathe mountain air. And when your child has a truly frightening illness, one that ordinary doctors cannot touch, your class has an alarming tendency to turn to something far stranger for help. The spa cure is the centerpiece of aristocratic medicine, and it is a marvel of turning illness into a holiday. Feeling run down, nervous, vaguely unwell in the way that people with nothing to do often are. The prescription is a lengthy stay at a fashionable European spa where you will drink mineral waters of dubious benefit, soak in warm baths, take gentle walks, and above all be seen taking the cure in the company of everyone else who matters. Half of the therapeutic value is medical, and the other half is social, because the great spa towns are simply the summer season relocated to prettier scenery. You go to get well, and you go to be seen getting well, which is arguably the more important of the two. Nervous complaints in particular have a curious prestige. To have delicate nerves, a sensitive constitution, a tendency toward fashionable exhaustion, is to be refined, high-strung, interesting. A robust peasant never has nervous complaints because a robust peasant is busy not starving. Your fragility is a luxury item, a sign that you're too finely made for the coarse business of ordinary life, and so a great deal of aristocratic illness hovers in that ambiguous zone between genuine suffering and performed delicacy, treated with rest cures and mountain air, and the tender attention of expensive physicians who know better than to tell a paying patient there is nothing much wrong with them. The actual medicine of the day is a genuine mixture. There are real advances and skilled doctors, and there is also a great deal of confident nonsense delivered with excellent bedside manner. You may be bled, purged, dosed with tonics of questionable content, prescribed regimens based on theories that will look absurd within a generation. Money buys you the very best available care, which is sometimes excellent and sometimes elaborately useless, and you have no way of telling which is which, because the useless kind is delivered with just as much authority as the good. But there is one shadow that no amount of money can lift, and it falls across the very highest family in the land. When a child of your class suffers from something the doctors cannot cure, a mysterious, terrifying, incurable affliction, desperation sets in, and desperation makes even sophisticated people reach for anything that promises hope. The finest physicians in Europe stand helpless. The best minds shrug, and into that gap of helplessness and terror, into the space where science fails and a mother's fear takes over, steps a figure who offers what the doctors cannot, the appearance of a miracle. That figure is about to become one of the most notorious men in the entire history of your empire. and his presence near the throne is a symptom of a sickness far deeper than anything found in a spa. But before we meet him, let us follow your class as it moves, restless and comfortable, across the map of Europe, because travel is the other great occupation of the idle rich, and it reveals just how little of your own country you've ever truly seen. You travel constantly and comfortably, gliding across the continent in private railway carriages fitted out like small hotels, taking the grand tour, wintering on the Riviera, summering wherever the fashionable people summer. Europe is your playground, and you move through it in a bubble of luxury so complete that you rarely have to touch the actual world. When you cross your own vast country by train, you watch it scroll past the window like a painting of somewhere else. The endless forests, the frozen rivers, the poor villages that seem to belong to a different century. You're a tourist in your own empire. You know Paris better than the province your fortune comes from. And that distance, that lovely insulated distance, is about to become extremely difficult to maintain. The private railway carriage is the perfect emblem of how you move through the world. It is not merely transport, it is a rolling extension of your palace, fitted with beds, a dining area, servants, and every comfort, sealed against the country it is passing through. You board in one grand city and disembark in another, and in between you exist in a small padded world of your own, insulated from the enormous nation sliding by outside the glass. You could cross 1,000 miles of Russia and never once breathe its air or speak to a soul who lives on it. You simply arrive, refreshed, wherever the fashionable people are gathering that season. And those gatherings are mostly in the West. The French Riviera in winter, its promenades full of Russian aristocrats fleeing the cold at home, the spa towns in their season, Paris always, endlessly Paris, for the clothes, the culture, the sheer pleasure of being somewhere that considers itself the centre of civilization. Your class feels more at home in these Western playgrounds than in the depth of its own country. You speak the language, you know the shops, you meet the same familiar faces. Russia is where your money comes from. Europe is where you go to enjoy it. This means that your knowledge of your own empire is astonishingly thin. You know the capital, you know your particular estate, and you know the route between them and the border. The rest, the overwhelming majority of the largest country on earth, is a rumour. A landscape glimpse from a train window, a place inhabited by people you regard as a different order of being. You know the boulevards of Paris intimately, and could not find your way around the province that pays for your entire life. You're a foreigner at home and a regular abroad, which is a strange condition for a supposed pillar of the nation. When you do look out of the train window at your own country, what you see confirms every comfortable assumption. The villages look poor, backward, timeless, quaint even, a picturesque backdrop rather than a place full of thinking, feeling, increasingly angry human beings. You do not see individuals, you see scenery. The poverty registers, if it registers at all, as a kind of natural feature, like the forests and the rivers, rather than as a condition created and maintained by the very system that keeps you in private railway carriages. But here is the thing about bubbles. They feel permanent from the inside, and they are always, in fact, extremely fragile. The distance you have so carefully maintained, this lovely insulation between your world and the real one, depends entirely on that real world staying quiet and staying put. It is not going to. The country you have spent your life watching through glass is about to come crashing through the window, and no private carriage, however luxurious, will carry you fast enough to escape it. For now, though, the bubble holds, sustained by the deepest and most soothing force in your entire civilization, the one thing that tells everyone, top and bottom alike, that the whole arrangement was ordained by God. Religion runs through your world like gold thread. The Orthodox Church is everywhere, in the icons glowing in the corner of every room, in the incense and the candlelight, in the long, beautiful services and the endless calendar of fasts and feasts. Faith is genuine for many and habit for many more, a source of comfort, order, and the reassuring belief that the whole hierarchy from peasant to czar was arranged by God himself and is therefore not to be questioned. It is a soothing idea, especially if you happen to be sitting near the top of it. But the country is quietly filling up with new ideas, hungry, modern, godless ideas that suggest the hierarchy was arranged not by God but by people, and that people can rearrange it whenever they like. The presence of the church in your life is total and beautiful. In every room of your home, in a high corner, there hangs an icon, a sacred image of Christ or the Virgin or a saint, often gilded, often ancient, before which a small lamp is kept burning. You cross yourself before it on entering and leaving. The rhythm of the year is set by the church calendar, the great feasts and the solemn fasts, the long meatless weeks of Lent, the glory of Easter, which in the Orthodox world is the most magnificent celebration of all. The services are long, sung rather than spoken, thick with incense and candlelight, and the deep sound of choirs, and whatever your private beliefs, they're undeniably beautiful. For many, the faith is entirely sincere, a genuine anchor in a difficult world. For others, it is closer to habit, a set of forms observed because they have always been observed, because doing otherwise is unthinkable. But sincere or habitual, the church performs the same crucial function for your class, and it is worth naming plainly. The church teaches that the entire social order, with its czar at the top and its peasants at the bottom, and your comfortable self somewhere near the summit, is not an accident, not an injustice, not a thing that human beings made and could unmake, but the will of God, divinely ordained and therefore sacred. This is, if you happen to be near the top, an extraordinarily convenient thing to believe. It transforms your privilege from something that might need justifying into something holy. You're not rich because your ancestors seized land and bound people to it. You are rich because that is the station God placed you in, and the peasant is poor because that is the station God placed him in, and to question the arrangement is not merely rude but blasphemous. The church blesses the whole structure and drapes it in incense, and for centuries this has helped keep the enormous bottom of the pyramid patiently, prayerfully in place. But something is shifting in the wider air, and the church's spell, so powerful for so long, is beginning to weaken at the edges. New ideas are moving through the empire carried by students and workers and agitators, and these ideas are frankly hostile to the whole notion of a divinely ordered hierarchy. They say the arrangement is not the will of God but the work of men, that poverty is not holy but manufactured, that the pyramid could simply be knocked over and rebuilt flat. To a hungry person who has been told his whole life that his suffering is sacred, this is electrifying news. And so the great comfort of your civilization, the reassuring weight of the church telling everyone to stay in their place, is quietly cracking, even as the incense still burns. Faith remains everywhere, but faith in the eternal rightness of the old order is leaking away where you cannot see it. Nowhere is that crisis of faith stranger or more visible than at the very top, in the imperial family itself, where desperation has invited a wild holy man into the heart of power. It is finally time to meet him. Every glittering court needs a scandal, and yours has an extraordinary one, because near the very centre of imperial power sits a wild-eyed, unwashed peasant holy man named Rasputin. He has won the fierce devotion of the Tsarina because he alone seems able to ease the suffering of her desperately ill son, the heir to the throne. To her he is a miracle. To the horrified aristocracy he is a stain, a grubby charlatan whispering into the ear of the empire, a symbol that something at the top has gone deeply, alarmingly wrong. The gossip about him is endless and poisonous. His influence feels like a crack running up the wall of a grand house, and the fact that the rot has reached this high should worry you far more than it does. Understand how he got there, because it is genuinely tragic underneath the scandal. The heir to the throne, the little boy on whom the entire future of the dynasty rests, suffers from a terrible blood disorder, an incurable condition that turns the smallest injury into a life-threatening crisis and subjects the child to episodes of agonizing pain. The finest doctors in the empire can do nothing. Imagine the terror of that for any parent, and now imagine it magnified by the knowledge that this fragile child is the single point on which an entire empire balances. Into that pit of helpless dread steps Rasputin, and somehow, whether by suggestion, by calm, by some quality no one can quite explain, he seems able to soothe the boy when no one else can. To the mother, the Tsarina, this makes him nothing less than a man sent by God, the one person on earth who can protect her son, and therefore a man to be trusted absolutely, defended fiercely, and kept close no matter what anyone says. Her devotion to him becomes total, and because she has enormous influence over her husband, and her husband rules the empire, this obscure Siberian holy man with his piercing eyes and his fearsome reputation finds himself with a line of influence running straight into the throne room, a peasant mystic advising or appearing to advise on the affairs of the state. To your class, this is a horror and a humiliation. The aristocracy is scandalized down to its bones. Here is this coarse, unwashed, allegedly debauched figure, a man of no birth and no manners, wielding influence that the greatest noble families can only dream of. The stories about him multiply and curdle, tales of drunkenness and seduction, and sinister power. Some true, many invented, all of them corrosive. Every whispered rumour about Rasputin is also unmistakably a rumour about the imperial family that tolerates him, and thus about the fitness of the whole regime to rule, because that is what makes him so much more than a scandal. Rasputin is a symptom. His presence at the heart of power is a sign, visible to everyone, that something has gone badly wrong at the very top, that the sacred imperial family is confused, frightened, and increasingly out of touch, clinging to a mystic while the country strains and cracks around them. The magic that once made the throne untouchable is failing. If a figure like this can worm his way to the centre, people begin to think, then perhaps the centre is not so sacred, not so solid, not so eternal after all. And that thought, once it takes hold, is more dangerous than any pamphlet. The mystique of the monarchy, the sense that it stands above and beyond ordinary judgment, is bleeding away, and Rasputin is both a cause and a glaring symbol of the wound. Which brings us at last to the throne itself, and to the terrible truth about the place your entire class has spent its life longing to stand. That proximity to the crown, the summit of all your ambitions, is about to become the most dangerous position in the empire. Proximity to the imperial family is the summit of everything your class strives for, and it is also, though nobody will say so, a slow-acting poison. To be close to the Tsar is to bask in his light, to gain favour, wealth, position. But the Tsar, Nicholas II, is a gentle, stubborn, tragically unsuited man presiding over a country that is straining at every seam, and he cannot see it, or will not. To stand near him is to stand near the exact spot where the empire is about to break. The higher you climb toward that throne, the further you have to fall, and when it goes, and it is going to go, the people standing closest to the crown will be the very first ones the storm reaches for. Let us speak honestly about the man on the throne, because so much depends on him. Nicholas is, by most accounts, a decent enough person in private, a devoted husband and father, kind in his personal dealings, sincere in his faith. He is also almost perfectly unsuited to the job of ruling the largest and most volatile empire on earth at the most dangerous moment in its history. He is stubborn where he should be flexible and yielding where he should be firm. He clings to the idea that he must preserve the full, God-given autocratic power he inherited, ruling as his ancestors ruled, deaf to the growing chorus insisting that the old ways can no longer hold. He means well, and meaning well in his position is not remotely enough. He cannot see the danger, or he refuses to. The strains are everywhere for anyone willing to look. The poverty, the anger, the new ideas, the cracks running through every level of the society. But Nicholas retreats from all of it into the comfortable certainty that the Russian people love their Tsar, that the troubles are the work of a few agitators, that if he simply holds firm and trusts in God, the storm will pass as storms always have. It is a fatal misreading, and he clings to it with the quiet stubbornness of a man who cannot bear to consider the alternative. The captain does not believe the ship is sinking, and so he gives no order to man the boats. And you and your entire class have organized your lives around getting as close to this man as possible. Proximity to the crown is the whole game, remember, the source of favor and legitimacy and meaning. So the grandest families cluster around the throne, competing for its light, tying their fortunes and their futures ever more tightly to the imperial family and its fate. You have spent generations climbing toward this summit, and now here you are, near the top, basking in the warmth of a sun that is, unknown to all of you, about to go out. Think about what that means when the fall comes. In a collapse, it is not the anonymous people at the bottom who are singled out first. It is the ones at the top, the visible ones, the ones whose faces and names are associated with the old order, the ones who stood closest to the crown and shared in its glory. Your proximity to the throne, the thing you prize above all else, is quietly transforming into a mark, a target, a liability that will one day be read aloud like a charge. The nearer you are to Nicholas now, the nearer you will be to the centre of the reckoning later. But you feel none of this. You feel only the warmth, the honour, the deep satisfaction of standing where your family always dreamed of standing. The storm is still a few years off, and the sun still seems to shine. So you settle back into the pleasures of your gilded life, of which there are still so many to explore, blissfully unaware that the ground beneath the throne and beneath you has already begun, very quietly, to move. Here is a problem money cannot solve. When you never have to work, the days become enormous and empty, and something has to fill them. For much of your class, the answer is vice conducted with excellent taste. There is gambling that ruins great fortunes overnight at the card table. There is drinking that begins earlier in the day than anyone admits. There are affairs, feuds, and elaborate romantic dramas pursued mostly out of a desperate need for something, anything, to happen. Boredom among the very rich is not a small thing. It is a vast, aching void, and it drives people to spectacular foolishness. You have everything, and it turns out that having everything is its own peculiar torment. So you deal another hand and refill the glass. Consider the shape of your day once the dressing and the visiting and the elaborate leisure are stripped away. There is no work waiting for you, no task that must be done, no purpose pulling you out of bed beyond the maintenance of your own comfort. This sounds like paradise to anyone who has ever worked, and it is for about a week. After that, the emptiness begins to press in. A life with no necessary labour is a life with a great deal of time to fill, and filling time turns out to be far harder than people who have too little of it imagine. So you gamble, and you gamble seriously. The card table is where a great deal of aristocratic energy goes, and the stakes are real, ruinously real. Entire estates change hands over a bad evening. Fortunes built across generations evaporate in a single night, because a bored nobleman could not stop, or would not, because the thrill of the risk was the only thing that had made him feel alive in weeks. Men of your class have gambled away their families' futures at those green tables, and the stories are told afterward with a kind of awe, as though losing everything with style were itself a form of achievement. And you drink. The drinking is constant and begins early and is never quite acknowledged as a problem, because everyone does it, so it simply becomes the background hum of aristocratic life. There is wine with everything, champagne for no reason, and stronger things after that. It fills the hours, it smooths the boredom, it lends a pleasant blur to a day that would otherwise stretch out flat and featureless. That some of your class are quietly destroying themselves this way is understood by all and mentioned by none, because to mention it would be vulgar, and vulgarity is the one thing your world truly cannot forgive. Then there are the dramas, the affairs and rivalries and feuds that your class cultivates like exotic plants, largely because they are interesting, and there is so little else that is. When nothing needs to happen, people manufacture events, and the events they manufacture are usually romantic or vengeful. A love affair provides weeks of intrigue. A bitter feud provides months. These dramas are pursued with an intensity that would be admirable if directed at anything of substance, and they consume the enormous surplus of energy and emotion that your idle life leaves with nowhere to go. It is, when you step back, a strange and rather sad spectacle. An entire class of clever, capable, energetic people, given everything, needing nothing, and slowly rotting from the inside out for want of a purpose. You've been freed from all necessity, and it turns out necessity was the thing giving shape to human life all along. So you fill the void with vodka and cards and manufactured passion, and you call it living. Meanwhile, some of that dangerous idle energy curdles into something sharper, a touchy, prickly obsession with honour that turns trivial slights into matters of life and death. Your class clings fiercely to an old and lethal idea called honour, which sounds noble, and in practice mostly means being willing to shoot a friend over a rude remark. An insult, real or imagined, can escalate with terrifying speed into a formal duel at dawn. Pistols in the cold, seconds standing by, a doctor waiting to see who bleeds. Men die this way. Over a card game, over a woman, over a sentence spoken in the wrong tone at the wrong party. It is a system that treats pride as more valuable than life itself, and it is taken with deadly seriousness. It is, when you look at it plainly, completely insane. And it is a useful preview of a class so wrapped up in its own rituals that it will defend its dignity long after it has lost everything else. Understand how the machinery of honour works, because it is genuinely bizarre. A gentleman's reputation is a sacred and fragile thing, and any perceived insult to it demands satisfaction, a word that here means a chance to shoot or be shot. The offence may be almost nothing. A dismissive remark, a slight at the card table, a rivalry over a woman, a tone of voice that struck the wrong ear. But once the insult is registered, an elaborate and rigid ritual grinds into motion, and it is very difficult to stop because to refuse the duel is to be branded a coward, and cowardice, in your world, is a fate worse than death. So the machinery proceeds. Seconds are appointed, representatives who negotiate the terms and try, sometimes to find an honourable way out, though honour usually forbids one. A time is set, typically at dawn, and a place somewhere quiet and discreet. The weapons are chosen, often pistols, And then two men who may have been friends the week before stand a measured distance apart in the cold morning air, raise their weapons and attempt to kill each other over a matter that, viewed from any sane vantage point, was not worth a single drop of blood. People genuinely die in these encounters, or are maimed, or carry the guilt of having killed a friend for the rest of their lives. The whole thing is defended as a matter of principle, as the mechanism by which a gentleman's honour is protected and society's manners are kept sharp. But look at what it actually is. A ritualised way of dying over pride, an agreement among the privileged that their dignity is a more precious commodity than their existence. It is the logic of a class with too much time, too much self-regard, and not nearly enough perspective, taken to its lethal conclusion. And there is something revealing in it, something that will echo. The duel shows you a class that will defend its honour to the literal death, that ranks the appearance of dignity above survival itself. This is a group of people trained from birth to believe that how they are perceived matters more than almost anything, that the forms and rituals of their status are worth dying for. It is a beautiful, absurd, and ultimately self-destructive value system, and it does not prepare you well for a future in which survival, plain and ugly, becomes the only thing that matters. Because that future is coming, and it will not care about your honour. It will not accept a duel or respect a title or pause for a point of etiquette. It will simply arrive, enormous and indifferent, and it will ask whether you can adapt, whether you can bend, whether you can survive. And a class that would rather be shot than slighted is not, it turns out, a class built for bending. The ideas that will bring that future are already here, already spreading, already climbing the back stairs of your own home. It is time to finally take them seriously. The most frightening thing in your house is not a person. It is an idea, and it is already inside. New philosophies are spreading through the empire like a fever. Ideas about equality, about workers, about the abolition of everything your life is built on. And they do not stay politely in the slums where you imagine they belong. They travel. They ride in on newspapers and pamphlets. They are whispered by students, and they may already be living quietly in the mind of the clever young tutor teaching your children French verbs. Your servants are listening more than you realise. The educated middle class is turning against you. The ground is shifting beneath the parquet floors, and the great tragedy of your class is that you will keep dancing right up until the music stops for good. Let us name what is spreading, without getting lost in the details, because the details matter less than the force of the thing. There are new ways of thinking about society taking hold across the empire, ideas that say the current arrangement, with its tiny wealthy elite and its vast impoverished majority, is not natural, not eternal, not ordained by God, but a system of injustice built by people and therefore able to be torn down by people. Some of these ideas are moderate, calling for reform. Others are radical, calling for the whole structure to be overturned and rebuilt from nothing, with the workers and peasants on top and families like yours simply abolished. And these ideas are astonishingly mobile. You imagine that dangerous thoughts stay where dangerous people live, safely confined to the factory districts and the poor villages, far from your drawing rooms. This is a fatal misunderstanding of how ideas work. They travel on cheap printed paper, in pamphlets and forbidden newspapers passed hand to hand. They are carried by students, by workers who have learned to read, by the restless, educated young who have absorbed them and now burn to spread them. They cross every boundary you thought would contain them, including the boundary of your own front door, because the people inside your house are not deaf, and they are not stupid, and they have every reason to listen. Your servants, moving invisibly through your rooms, hearing everything, seeing the gap between your life and theirs every single day, are exactly the audience these ideas were made for. The educated professionals, the doctors and lawyers and teachers of the growing middle class, look at the useless, glittering aristocracy above them and increasingly find it absurd and unjust. Even the clever foreign tutor shaping your children may carry sympathies that would horrify you if you knew. The rebellion is not gathering somewhere else. It is gathering all around you, in the very people you depend on. And this is the tragedy that gives the whole story its shape. Your class does not see it, or refuses to, right up until the end. You go on with the balls and the card games and the duels and the health cures abroad, treating the rumbling as background noise, a problem for someone else, a phase that will pass. You keep dancing because dancing is what you know how to do, and because stopping to look honestly at what is coming would require admitting that your entire world rests on foundations that are already crumbling. But ideas, once loose, cannot be recalled, and this particular set of ideas has a specific and violent trajectory. It has, in fact, already tried once to bring your world down. In a convulsion, your class managed to survive and then, catastrophically, chose to forget. That was the warning, the rehearsal, the dress run for the real thing. Let us go back to it, because everything that happens next was written plainly in that earlier storm, and nobody in your world bothered to read it. Here is the thing that should terrify you the most. You have already been warned. Back in 1905, the empire convulsed. Crowds marched, workers struck, sailors mutinied, and blood ran in the streets when peaceful crowds were fired upon. For a moment it looked as though the whole structure might come down right then. It did not. Concessions were made, a parliament was promised, the pressure eased, and your class breathed a sigh of relief and went straight back to its balls and its Fabergé eggs, treating the whole thing as an unpleasant episode now safely behind you. It was not behind you. It was a rehearsal. The house shook, the cracks appeared, and everyone agreed to repaint over them. The second time the house shakes, it will not stop. Let us return to that year, because it explains everything. The trouble had been building for a long time. The poverty, the anger, the new ideas, and in 1905 it finally broke the surface. It began, in part, with a peaceful crowd of ordinary workers approaching the imperial palace to petition their Tsar, whom they still, at that point, trusted as a father. They came humbly, hopefully carrying icons, and they were met with gunfire. Soldiers fired on the unarmed crowd, and people died in the snow, and something precious and irreplaceable died with them. The old faith that the Tsar loved his people and would protect them. From that wound the whole empire seemed to erupt. Workers went on strike across the country, shutting down factories and railways. Peasants rose against their landlords. Even parts of the military mutinied. Most famously the sailors of a great battleship whose rebellion became a legend. For a period of months the machinery of the state seemed to be seizing up, the authority of the throne wavering, and it genuinely looked as though the entire order, your entire order, might be swept away right there and then. The house did not just shake, it swayed, and for a terrible moment it seemed about to fall, but it did not fall, and the reason it did not fall is the key to the whole tragedy. The regime, frightened, gave ground. Concessions were offered. There would be an elected assembly, a parliament of sorts, and promises of reform, and reforms enough to divide the opposition and let the pressure escape. The most dangerous energy dissipated. The strikes ended, the mutinies were crushed, order was gradually restored, and the immediate crisis passed. The throne survived, wounded but intact, and your class survived along with it. And here is where your world made its fatal choice. Having survived the earthquake, it decided the earthquake had not really meant anything. The concessions were quietly hollowed out. The promised reforms were watered down or reversed. The parliament was kept weak and repeatedly dissolved, and the aristocracy, vastly relieved, simply went back to normal, back to the balls and the diamonds and the comfortable assumption that the storm had been an aberration rather than a warning. You treated a near-death experience as a piece of bad luck and learned nothing from it whatsoever. That was the unforgivable error, the wasted warning. 1905 had shown in unmistakable terms exactly what was coming and exactly how it would arrive. Through hunger, through strikes, through soldiers who would eventually refuse to fire, through a loss of faith in the Tsar that could not be repaired. All of it was there to be read, and your class, given the rarest of gifts, a preview of its own destruction, chose to look away and repaint the cracks. The next time the house shakes, there will be no concessions clever enough to save it, and the next shake is coming, brought on by a catastrophe your world is about to stumble into with breathtaking confidence. A war. Then comes the summer of 1914, and the great powers of Europe stumble into a war so vast and so mechanized that nothing will survive it unchanged, least of all you. At first there is a strange excitement, a flush of patriotism, young aristocrats rushing to become dashing officers, everyone certain it will be glorious and brief. It is neither. It is endless, and it is a slaughter on a scale the world has never imagined, and Russia feeds millions of its sons into it. The war devours money, food, fuel, and faith. It exposes every weakness in the empire, every incompetence, every rotten beam holding up the roof. Your comfortable world assumed it had all the time in the world. The war has just informed you, in the coldest possible terms, that it does not. The beginning is almost festive, which is the cruelest part. When war breaks out, a wave of patriotic feeling sweeps the country, and for a brief deceptive moment it even seems to unite the fractured empire behind its Tsar. The young men of your class are thrilled. War is glorious, they believe, an adventure, a chance for honour and heroism of exactly the kind their whole upbringing has celebrated. They rush to take up commissions as officers, splendid in their uniforms, certain that they will win quick victories and be home, garlanded by the time the leaves fall. It is the honour culture of the duel scaled up to the size of a continent, and it is about to meet reality. Reality is the modern battlefield, and it has no interest in glory. This war is unlike anything in human experience, a mechanized slaughter of machine guns and heavy artillery and barbed wire, where courage counts for little against industrial killing, and men die not in heroic single combat, but in their thousands, anonymously, in the mud. Russia pours its people into this furnace, millions upon millions of them, mostly peasant conscripts, poorly equipped, badly led, sent to fight and die for reasons few of them understand or accept. The casualties are staggering, beyond comprehension, a whole generation being fed into the grinder, and the war does something far more dangerous than kill soldiers. It puts the entire empire under a strain it cannot bear, and in doing so it exposes every single weakness that the good times had concealed. The incompetence of the leadership becomes impossible to hide. The supply system fails. The economy buckles under the impossible cost. Every rotten beam in the structure of the old order, every flaw that had been papered over during the years of peace, is suddenly bearing a weight it was never built for, and beginning, audibly, to crack. Worst of all, the war drains away the last reserves of faith. Faith in the competence of the government as defeat follows defeat. Faith in the Tsar, who eventually takes personal command of the army, and thereby personally attaches his name to every subsequent disaster. Faith in the whole arrangement, as ordinary people are asked to sacrifice everything, their sons, their food, their futures, while the glittering elite carries on above them. The war is not just a military catastrophe. It is the great accelerant, the thing that takes all the slow-building pressures of the previous decades and brings them suddenly to the boiling point, your class assumed as it always assumed, that there was plenty of time, that the old world would go on more or less forever, that whatever troubles came could be managed and survived, as 1905 had been survived. The war ends that assumption forever. It is the hammer blow the cracked house cannot absorb, and its effects do not stay politely at the distant front. They come home, into the cities, into the streets, into the very heart of your comfortable world, in the form of cold, hunger, and a rage that is finally running out of patience. As the war grinds on, the glittering life you knew begins to curdle even inside the cities. There are shortages now, real ones. Bread grows scarce, fuel runs low, and the long queues in the freezing streets are full of exhausted, furious people. The wounded come home in unimaginable numbers. The casualty lists grow longer than anyone can bear. And the anger, that slow, fermenting anger from the villages and the factories, is no longer distant. It is here, in the capital, sharpened by hunger and grief, and the sight of your class still, somehow, trying to hold its parties. The gap between your world and everyone else's has never been wider, and it has never been more visible. When people are starving in the snow outside a lit palace window, they eventually stop just looking through the glass. The shortages are the first thing that cannot be ignored. The war has swallowed the country's resources and broken the systems that once kept the cities fed and warm. Bread, the basic staple, becomes scarce and then desperately scarce. Fuel to heat homes through the brutal winter runs short. And so the streets of the capital fill with queues, long lines of cold, tired, hungry people standing for hours in the freezing dark for a loaf that may run out before they reach the front. These are not abstract statistics. These are your fellow city dwellers, and their patience is being ground down to nothing, day by frozen day. Meanwhile, the war keeps sending back its harvest. The wounded return in numbers no one is prepared for, filling the hospitals, filling the streets, visible everywhere as living evidence of the catastrophe at the front. The lists of the dead grow longer with every offensive, and nearly every family, especially among the peasants and workers who make up the bulk of the army, is touched by loss. Grief settles over the country like a second winter, and grief, mixed with hunger and exhaustion, is a combustible thing. People who have lost their sons and cannot feed their children are not in a forgiving mood. And what do they see when they lift their hollow eyes from the bread queue? They see that not everyone is suffering equally. They see that the glittering world at the top, though diminished, is still turning, that there are still those who dine well while the city starves, still comfort and even luxury behind certain lit windows. Your class, reduced but not ruined, still tries to maintain its life, its dinners, its diminished but persistent version of the old glamour. And in a starving city, that persistence is not merely tone-deaf, it is provocative, it is the spark held next to the fuel. The gap between your world and the world of the streets, always vast, has now become both wider and crucially far more visible. In the fat years, the poverty was somewhere else, in the distant villages, glimpsed from a train window, easy to ignore. Now it is right outside, in the capital, in the freezing queues beneath your very windows, impossible to miss and impossible to explain away. The insulation that protected your class for so long, the lovely distance, has collapsed. The two Russias are now standing in the same cold street, and one of them is armed with a rage that has finally found its target. This cannot hold, and it does not. There is only so long that hungry, grieving, exhausted population will keep queuing quietly in the snow, while the old order fumbles and the glittering few carry on. The pressure has built past every limit. All that remains is the trigger, The particular cold week when the queues turn into crowds and the crowds turn into something the regime can no longer control. That week is coming, and when it arrives, 300 years of imperial rule will unravel with a speed that leaves everyone, your class most of all, utterly stunned. Then, in the bitter cold of early 1917, it happens, not with a grand battle, but with breadlines and strikes, and soldiers who refuse to fire on the crowds. In a matter of days, faster than anyone believed possible, the whole imperial edifice that had stood for 300 years simply collapses under its own exhausted weight. The Tsar, the sacred center of your entire universe, abdicates. Just like that, the throne is empty. The unthinkable has become the news. Your class stands blinking in the sudden silence where an empire used to be, still half convinced that surely someone will restore order, that this is another 1905, another episode to be repainted over. It is not. This time the house is genuinely coming down, and you're still inside it. Notice how it begins, because the ordinariness of it is astonishing. There is no dramatic invasion, no grand rebel army marching on the capital. There are only the things that had been building for years, finally converging in one freezing week. The bread queues, the strikes, as workers walk out of the factories, demonstrations in the streets that swell, day by day, into enormous crowds. It looks at first like unrest the regime has weathered before, the kind of thing that has always been contained by a show of force. Everyone assumes the soldiers will restore order, as soldiers always have. That assumption is about to prove fatally wrong. Because this time, the soldiers do not fire. Ordered to turn their guns on the crowds, the troops, many of them war-weary conscripts who share the crowd's hunger and fury, refuse. They lower their weapons. They fraternize with the demonstrators. Some of them join. And in that moment, the single pillar on which the entire regime ultimately rested, the willingness of armed men to shoot their own people on command, simply gives way. Without that, the throne has nothing left holding it up. The whole apparatus of imperial authority, which had seemed so solid, so eternal, so blessed by God, turns out to have been resting on a foundation that has just walked away. And then, with a speed that stuns the world, it is over. The Tsar, away from the capital, isolated, abandoned by his generals and his ministers, is advised that he can no longer hold power, and he abdicates. 300 years of the dynasty that defined Russia end not with a heroic last stand, but with a signature on a document. A tired man giving up a throne that has already dissolved beneath him. The sacred center of your universe, the source of all legitimacy, the summit your class spent generations climbing toward, is simply gone. The seat is empty. The unthinkable has become a plain fact reported in the newspapers. Your class receives this news in a state of profound disbelief. Surely, you tell yourselves, this cannot be permanent. Surely order will be restored, some strong hand will emerge, some arrangement will be reached, and the essential structure of things, however modified, will endure. You reach instinctively for the memory of 1905, when the house shook and steadied. You assume this is another such shaking, frightening but survivable, a crisis to be managed and then, in time, forgotten and painted over. You are, one final time, catastrophically wrong. Because this is not 1905. There will be no clever concessions this time, no reform sufficient to release the pressure, no return to the old normal. The throne is not wounded. It is gone, and it is not coming back. The old world has ended cleanly and completely in the space of a few cold days, and into the vacuum it leaves, into the chaos and confusion and desperate hope of a country that has just torn out its own foundation. Something new is about to move, something disciplined and ruthless and utterly unlike anything your class is equipped to survive. The chaos does not resolve into something comfortable. Later that same year, a small, disciplined, absolutely ruthless group seizes power with a clarity of purpose your fumbling class never possessed. They do not want to reform your world. They want to abolish it, root and branch, and they mean it in a way you're not equipped to understand. Private property, noble titles, vast estates, the entire architecture of your existence is declared over, illegitimate, finished. Everything you were, everything you owned, everything your ancestors built and hoarded and passed down is dissolved by decree. There is no negotiating with this. There is no charming your way out of it with good French and a raised eyebrow. The world did not just change. The world you belong to has been officially declared to have never had the right to exist. Understand first what filled the gap after the throne fell. The abdication did not produce order. It produced a fragile provisional arrangement, well-meaning perhaps but weak, trying to govern a country in the middle of a catastrophic war while every problem that had brought down the Tsar remained unsolved. The hunger did not end. The war dragged on. The chaos deepened. And in that swirling uncertainty, with the old authority gone and the new authority feeble, the field was open for whoever had the discipline, the clarity, and the ruthlessness to seize it. Your class, disoriented and reactive, had none of these. Another group had all three. That group takes power later in the year, in a second upheaval that finishes what the first began. They are organized where everyone else is confused, decisive where everyone else hesitates, and absolutely certain of their aims where everyone else is merely trying to survive. And their aims are not modest. They have no interest in tinkering with the old system, in reforming it, in reaching some compromise that preserves a place for families like yours. Their goal is total transformation, the complete abolition of the old order and the construction of something entirely new in its place, built on principles precisely opposite to everything your world stood for. And so the decrees begin, and each one erases a piece of your reality. Private ownership of land, the very foundation of your family's wealth, is abolished. The great estates are to be seized and redistributed. Noble titles, the currency of your entire social existence, are declared meaningless, gone, void. The distinctions of rank and birth that ordered your whole life are legislated out of existence. Piece by piece, with the stroke of pens, the entire architecture of the aristocratic world is dismantled, and not gradually, not gently, but with the swift finality of people who have waited a long time for exactly this, and intend to make it stick. There is no defense against this, and that is the part your class cannot absorb. Every skill you possess is useless here. You cannot charm your way out of a decree. You cannot deploy your impeccable French, your perfect manners, your knowledge of precedents and etiquette against people who regard all of it not as impressive, but as evidence of your guilt. The very things that made you admirable in the old world make you a target in the new one. Your refinement, your privilege, your proximity to the fallen throne, all of it now marks you not as elevated but as condemned. The deepest shock, though, is not merely that you have lost your wealth and status. It is that the new order declares you never had any right to them in the first place, that your entire existence was a crime against the people, that the world you belonged to was not a legitimate civilization brought low, but an injustice finally corrected. Your world did not simply end. It was retroactively convicted, and the people who ran it, people like you, are now assigned a new and dangerous identity, a label that turns your whole glittering past into a mark of shame and a source of mortal peril. There is a chilling new phrase for people like you now. You are a former person, Not an aristocrat, not a lady, not a gentleman, but a former one, a relic of a condemned age, stripped of your property, your title, your protection, and increasingly your safety. Your palace is seized, your possessions are taken or scattered. Your name, once a passport into every gilded room in the empire, is now a liability that can get you arrested or worse. The terror that follows is real and merciless, and being who you were is suddenly one of the most dangerous things a person can be. All that beauty, all that privilege, all that careful cultivation of uselessness. And now the single most useful skill imaginable would be the ability to become invisible, which of course you were never taught. Sit with the phrase itself because it captures everything. A former person. Not a person in your own right anymore, but the leftover of something that has been abolished, a human remnant of a discredited past. It is a designation that strips away not just your wealth, but your standing as a full member of the new society. Former people are pushed to the bottom of every list. Denied rations, denied work, denied the ordinary protections that others receive, marked out as belonging to the enemy class, the class that has been overthrown and is now, in the eyes of the new order, receiving what it deserves. The material collapse is total and swift. Your palace, that freezing monument you woke up in so many chapters ago, is seized, requisitioned, handed over to others or turned to new purposes. Your possessions, the jewels and furs and art and Fabergé adjacent treasures, are confiscated, scattered, sold, or simply taken. The estates, the land, the source of it all, gone. In a stunningly short time, a family that had accumulated wealth across centuries finds itself with nothing, or with only what it can carry or hide or sew into the lining of a coat in the desperate hope of getting it out. And your name, the thing you prized above almost everything, undergoes the most terrible transformation of all. Once your name opened every door, granted entry to every gilded room, announced your worth before you even spoke. Now it does the opposite. Now it marks you. To be identified as an aristocrat, a noble, a former great family, is to be flagged as an enemy, and in the atmosphere of terror that descends, that flag can mean arrest, imprisonment, or death. The very identity your class spent generations building and burnishing has become the most dangerous thing you possess. You spend your days now trying to shed it, to hide it, to become no one. But here is the final bitter joke that the whole story has been building toward. In this new world where survival is stripped down to its rawest form, the most valuable thing a person could possibly have is the ability to be useful, to work, to labour, to blend in, to disappear into the ordinary mass of people getting by. And that is the one thing your class was never ever taught. Your beautiful, useless education, your soft hands, your fluent French, your exquisite manners, your cultivated helplessness, all of it is now not just worthless but actively dangerous, a set of glaring signals marking you as exactly the kind of person the new order is hunting. The peasant who can grow a potato, the worker who can mend a machine. These people have skills that translate into survival. You have the ability to quote poetry in 4 languages and identify a good vintage at 50 paces. You were prepared, with enormous care and expense, for a world that no longer exists, and left utterly unprepared for the one that has replaced it. For those who cannot hide, the ending is grim indeed, but some do escape, do get out, carrying their useless skills and their dangerous names into a strange new life of exile, where the last, saddest chapter of your world story quietly plays itself out. For those who get out, and many do not, there is exile, and exile is its own strange, sad afterlife. The survivors scatter across Europe to Paris, Berlin and beyond, carrying whatever jewels they managed to sew into their coats and a lifetime of skills that are now worth precisely nothing. And so, the astonishing final image of your world takes shape in the cafes of Paris. Countesses working as seamstresses, colonels waiting tables, and genuine grand dukes, men who once stood near the throne of an empire, driving taxis through the rain, telling passengers stories that sound like fairy tales because they are. You survived. But the world that made you meaningful is gone forever, dissolved into memory and rumour and the faint smell of a perfume nobody makes anymore. You were rich in Imperial Russia, and in the end that was the most dangerous thing you could possibly have been. The escape itself for those who manage it is a harrowing thing, a flight across a country in chaos, carrying what little can be carried, bribing and hiding and running toward any border that offers a way out. Some carry jewels sewn into the linings of their clothes, the last liquid remnant of a vast fortune, to be sold off slowly abroad to fund a life in exile. Many carry nothing but their lives and the clothes on their backs, and a great many do not make it out at all. Caught in the terror, lost in the chaos of the civil war that follows, vanished into a history that did not record their names. The ones who reach safety are the lucky ones, if lucky is even the word. They gather, these survivors, in the great cities of Europe, in Paris above all, in Berlin, in Constantinople, wherever émigrés could land and cluster together and try to reassemble some fragment of the world they had lost. And in exile they discover the full, cruel weight of everything the earlier chapters warned about. Their titles mean nothing here. Their estates are gone forever. Their fortunes, if not sewn into a coat, are simply lost. And their skills, their beautiful, ornamental, painstakingly cultivated skills, turn out to be worth almost nothing in a world that asks people to actually work for a living. So the images multiply, and they are unforgettable precisely because they are true. Aristocratic ladies who were once dressed by armies of servants now sit stitching for their supper, their fine needlework the one useful thing all those years of accomplishment left them. Officers who once commanded regiments wait tables in restaurants remembering, and most famously of all, genuine members of the highest nobility, men who had stood within reach of the imperial throne itself, are found driving taxis through the wet Paris streets, ferrying strangers from place to place, and sometimes, if asked, telling them quietly about the palaces and the balls and the Fabergé eggs, stories so extravagant the passengers assume they must be invented. But they are not invented. That is the whole point. The taxi driver really was a Grand Duke. The seamstress really was a countess. The waiter really did command men in a war that helped end their world. They carry within them the memory of an entire vanished civilization, a world of impossible glamour and impossible blindness that burned brilliantly and then, in the space of a few years, ceased entirely to exist. They survived it. But survival, it turns out, is not the same as being spared, because the world that gave their lives meaning is gone, and no amount of remembering can bring it back. And so we arrive at the strange, quiet truth at the centre of the whole story. Being rich in the Russian Empire in the 1910s was not the safe, enviable, permanent condition it appeared to be. It was a beautiful position at the very top of a structure that was already crumbling, and when that structure fell, the height that had seemed like such a blessing became the longest and most dangerous fall of all. You were rich and refined and elevated above every ordinary concern, and in the end, in that particular time and place, that was the most dangerous thing a person could possibly be. So there you have it. You woke this morning in 1913, buried under imported linen in a freezing palace, waited on by a silent army, dressed by committee, fed like a small festival, and carried through a glittering world of balls and diamonds and jewelled golden eggs. You spoke French to people who spoke Russian. You danced on polished floors above a country you never truly saw. You climbed as your family always dreamed, toward the warm light of the throne. And then, quietly at first and then all at once, the whole beautiful structure came down, and you learned the strangest lesson of all, that in that time and place, being rich was the most dangerous thing a person could be. It is a peculiar kind of story, this one. Not a tale of humble people enduring hardship, but of privileged people discovering too late that privilege was never the same thing as safety. The peasants you barely noticed, the servants who watched you so closely, the vast patient country beyond your window, they carried the real weight of that age, and many of them carried it into a future that finally, at terrible cost, belonged to them. So tonight, as you settle into your own warm bed, in a home you can heat with the turn of a dial, in a world where your worth is not measured by your bloodline and your safety does not depend on the mood of a crowd, maybe spare a soft thought for all of them, the fallen and the risen alike, the ones who danced and the ones who watched. History is grand and cruel and gently absurd, and you thankfully get to simply close your eyes on it, sleep well,